For the longest time, what we call a Linux package manager has worked in a relatively similar way, whether we're talking about pacman, emerge, apt, DNF. This is generally applicable. When you want to install an application, it would download the source code or the binary depending on which solution you are using, compiling it if it needs to be. Then it would download all of the dependencies, doing the exact same thing. These would then be placed into a sensible directory to make use of them, things like your user bin for your binaries. The only problem with this solution is it's very distro specific. Different distros are using different tooling, and even if a distro is using the same tooling, say for example Ubuntu and Pop! OS or Arch Linux and Manjaro, they're not using the same repos. So if you don't have the same repos, the application versions are going to be different, the dependency versions are going to be different, and things will not line up correctly. And eventually, to address this problem, we saw the rise of distro-independent packaging. Things like Flatpak and Snap, less so Snap. Now, sometimes app image does get bundled in here as well, but that works a little bit differently. Now, with this solution, your applications are completely separate from what you have installed on your distro. So if I install something like the OBS Flatpak on Ubuntu, and then I install it on Fedora, Arch Linux, anything else out there, the application version and its dependencies will be exactly the same. The only issue with this solution is it's another new solution. So for quite a while, application availability has been fairly limited. Nowadays, it's gotten a lot better, but it is not uncommon for an application to not be available as a Flatpak. But very recently, really only the past couple of months, I've been seeing the rise of a whole new kind of package manager. So new, they don't really have an agreed upon name. Package managers based upon distro containers. Now, the ones that I know of are based on distrobox, these being Apex from Vanilla OS and Blend from Blend OS. If you've never heard of either of these tools before and you've never used distrobox, basically the way it works is distrobox is a wrapper for Docker or Podman. These are tools for running a containerized version of Linux. Basically a Linux distro on top of your existing Linux distro. In distrobox, these are referred to as boxes. So let's say your main system is Ubuntu, for example, and you want to access something on Arch Linux. You can set up an Arch box and install anything you want on Arch Linux. If you want something from Fedora, you can set up a Fedora box and install anything you want from Fedora. And distrobox basically just automates that process and makes that box integrate nicely with your host system. What makes this really useful is when you install an application, it isn't going to disturb anything on your regular system outside of the box. It's not going to overwrite any packages or anything like that. The application stays in the box, but it can access your home directory, so you can use those applications to access your regular files, and you can even expose the application to your regular system and run it like anything else. And because this isn't a virtual machine, it is just running natively on your hardware, the performance is basically the exact same as running native. There is a little bit of overhead for running Docker or Podman, but it's basically negligible. Now, by itself, distrobox is an incredible tool, it is incredibly powerful, and it makes it really easy to set up these Docker and Podman containers. The only issue is it's not really that convenient when it comes to installing an application. If you want to install something, you have to go inside the box, run the package manager, install the application, expose it outside the program, and then you've got it. But this is where some optimization can come in. This is what Apex and Blend do. What these tools do is offer a package manager-like interface, things like Apex install, Apex remove, Apex run, things you would generally expect from something like apt or Flatpak, and abstracting out what's happening on the backend. It doesn't matter if it's installing it in the Ubuntu box or the Fedora box or the Arch box. All that matters in the end is you have an application you want to install, you've installed it, and then you want to run it, so go and run it. Deal with the rest of the stuff, it doesn't matter how it works. And this method offers some really cool benefits. One of those being, distrobox can store all of your boxes inside of your home directory. Now this might not really matter if you're on something like Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, most of the distros out there, but it does really matter if you're using an immutable Linux distro. Let's say you're using Vanilla OS, Blend OS, Silverblue, SteamOS 3. One of the biggest issues with an immutable distro is software availability. Now, things based on OS tree do have access to overlay packages. The only issue with overlay packages is the more of them you have, the longer it's going to take to update your system when you have a new image come in. So they're probably best to avoid unless you absolutely need to use them. However, a distrobox-based package manager doesn't have that problem. Everything can just be installed into your home directory, and when you update, nothing is going to be affected. And it also gives you access to way more applications, not just on your distro base, but any other distro base out there. So it eliminates any concerns over packages missing. Just having access to Arch Linux and the AUR, that's going to cover pretty much anything you could ever need. And with Arch Linux, it's going to generally be a lot more of an up-to-date version of the application. So let's say you're using something based on Ubuntu, and it's shipping a really old version of Firefox, for example. You could just not use it, and then use the version from Arch, or use the version from Void, or Gentoo, or something else like that, where it's going to be much, much newer. With most other package managers, you simply don't have that luxury, so you're stuck waiting for a third-party package, or working out how to compile it yourself. But speaking of compiling it yourself, most developers out there don't test their package on every single distro. Even for major applications on major distros, most of the packages available out there are not made by the application developers. They are made by the distro maintainers. In some cases, the developer will have maybe 1 or 2 official packages. For example, with OBS, the only official package that is not a Flatpak is on Ubuntu. The one on Arch Linux is made by the distro maintainers, the one on Fedora, the one on Gentoo, the one on anything else out there is not made by the developers. It's made by the distro maintainers, and when it's made by the distro maintainers, it might have some tweaks here and there that don't align with what the developers want to do. But when an application is made specifically for one distro and tested for that one distro, it's known to work there, and sometimes might be the better experience. So if you have a distrobox-based package manager, install the application on the distro it works best on. If that's Ubuntu, it's on Ubuntu. If that's on Gentoo, it's on Gentoo. Give yourself the best experience without breaking anything on your host system. Speaking of not breaking your host system, let's say you're using an LTS release. The whole point of an LTS release is to have a stable baseline where things will not move. And this is really great for your core system packages. But it can be an issue for various other things like your web browser, your OBS version. And while you could wait a really, really long time to access any new features you want, you could also install it in a distrobox-based package manager and get it from somewhere that's going to be a lot more up-to-date without disturbing those core packages. Now, I do want to make something really clear. While these package managers are really useful, they are not without their drawbacks. While running a container is not as heavy as dual booting a whole other distro, running a distro box is absolutely not free. Every single box is going to have to install a lot of these core system packages, and you're going to have a lot of duplicate packages in a lot of boxes. This isn't really a problem with 1 or 2 boxes, which should be enough to cover most of the applications you need. But if you want one package from Gentoo, one package from Fedora, one from Arch, one from something else and something else, the more boxes you have, you're gonna start noticing it eating up a lot of your storage space. If you have like, a terabyte, 2 terabyte drive, it's probably not gonna be that big of a deal. But if you're using like a 256, 512 gig, maybe think twice about how many boxes you let it make, or using this solution full stop. And hey, don't forget you'd have to learn a whole new tool as well, but that should be expected. At least for Apex, it is very heavily inspired by existing package managers. If you try to use it, you're gonna notice it pretty much feels like apt or Flatpak. Everything is a well-named command. You can work out at least the basics in like 5 or 10 minutes. There's some more advanced stuff that might seem a little bit confusing, but you typically wouldn't have to touch that. When it comes to like installing, removing, upgrading, things like that, it's pretty straightforward. I am very curious to see what is going to happen with this idea. Whether it's just going to be this neat little experiment that never really catches on, whether it's going to be something that becomes a major part of major distros, I don't really know. It's only been a couple of months. There is a lot of time for these tools to mature or just fall by the wayside. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Have you tried out Apex? Have you tried Blend? Have you tried out the distros they ship with? I would love to know. And if you like this video, remember to go and like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, go check out my Patreon, subscribe, simply pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and